Hey everyone, I'm Justin. Welcome to my channel, Justin Hits the Trail. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite pieces of gear, and that is the Gossamer Gear, the One. I'll go over all the specs with you, I'll set it up for you, and then I'll give you my review on it. So at the end of this video, you can decide if the One is the one for you. So stick around, let's dive in. So quick background before we get started. I used this on my thru hike of the JMT last summer. It performed phenomenally for me up there, and I've been using it almost every time I've gone on even my short weekend trip since then. So this has become one of my go-to pieces of gear. I have a lot of positive things to say about it, but not everything is good. It definitely does have its flaws. So let's start with the basics. The One is a semi-freestanding or trekking pole tent. It does not have a dedicated pole structure. It's meant to be set up with trekking poles, although you can buy Gossamer Gear's aftermarket poles if you don't use trekking poles, which, I mean, in my opinion, kind of defeats the purpose of a trekking pole tent because you're going to use something that you already have, but that is an option if you want it. So this is a single walled shelter, one piece. Aside from the mesh, it is completely made out of 10 denier sil poly that is waterproof up to 1800 millimeters. So the tent itself weighs about 17.7 ounces. That's according to the Gossamer Gear website, and I did verify that with a scale at home. It comes with 8 stakes. I purchased an additional 4 shepherd hook stakes so I could stake out the bathtub floor because I think it makes it a little more roomy. But with the ground sheet, with all the stakes, with the stuff sacks, this total package here weighs about 24 ounces for me. So a pound and a half for a pretty kick-ass tent. Pretty damn good if you ask me. All right, so let's get this thing set up and then we'll go over the dimensions with you. So as long as it's not windy, the first thing I like to do is lay out my ground sheet. We'll get the tent on top of it, then we'll set the poles up in there and start staking it up. And actually, before we start putting the poles in place, the first thing we have to do is stake out the corners. Okay, so now that we have the corners staked out, let's get the poles in place. And you're going to want to set your trekking poles to 125 centimeters. So it doesn't matter which pole you put in place first, be it the front or the back of the tent, but when we stake out the poles, we're going to want to do the back first and then the front. Let's get the poles in place. So once you have the poles staked out, just kind of get in there a little bit and spread them apart until you have a nice taut floor. They should be angled slightly out, makes for a bigger, roomer interior, and you'll see what I mean here in a little bit. So once we have the poles in place and you spread out the bottom so the floor is nice and taut going across, the first thing we're going to tighten is going to be this tension going across the top with the poles. So just adjust either side accordingly until it's nice and tight across the top. All right, and once those are tight, we're gonna adjust each corner until there are no more wrinkles on the sides of the tent. Okay, change the angle here. So this is the most minimal pitch that you can do. The bathtub floor is not staked out, but it is set up. It is going to be nice and sturdy here. Not worried about the structure of it at this point. Everything is nice and tight. It's looking good. But like I said, the bathtub floor, at this point, it's just kind of, hanging loose here. So if you're like me, I like to get that staked out. And then after that, I'll show you how to make a little more head and foot room. All right, so I went ahead, I staked out the bathtub floor with these little shepherd hooks. You can tell it's already a little more taut, a little roomier inside, and we can create even more room inside by staking out these guy lines on both the head and the foot end. All right. So the head and the foot end are staked out for a little more room inside. This is about as set up as this tent is going to get. Let me show you around here so you can see what we're looking at. So this is the back side. It does not come all the way down to the ground, but that has not been an issue for me yet. Saves a little bit of weight, and maybe it's just unnecessary. So one thing to keep in mind is even though the footprint of the tent itself is not too big, it does take quite a bit of room to stake out. So something to keep in mind if you're going to be in really tight quarters. That's something you might want to watch out for. Quick note too, this is an aftermarket zipper. The zipper that came with it actually broke shortly after I finished the JMT, of course, and on a rainy night, but I made it work. But Gossamer Gear was awesome. They had a third-party company. They replaced it for free and shipped it back. It was very easy to do. I only had to pay for shipping one way. Well worth it. And now I got a little thicker zipper on here that has been holding up great. So let me pull this vestibule door back, and then we'll go over the dimensions of it. All right, let's get into the tent, and I'll show you the dimensions here. So the bathtub floor itself is 84 inches long, so it can fit a pretty tall person, especially when you guy out the foot end and the head end for a little more room there. It is 33 inches across at the top, and at the foot end it is about 21 inches, but don't worry, it will fit a 25-inch rectangular pad. I'll show you here in a second. And then for headroom, we're looking at 45 inches of height. So you can see how it's ventilated here. There's some mesh panels at the head, that same mesh panel at the foot, a big mesh panel to your left, and then when you're inside, the entire right wall is all mesh. So plenty breathable for sure. Okay, so now I have my 25-inch wide, 72-inch long, very plush, thick sleeping pad in here. And even though it tapers down to 21 inches, I mean, it pushes out the side a little bit, but it still works. So if you're concerned about your wide sleeping pad not fitting in here, I mean, it does take up a majority of the floor. Got a little room here to work with, but it does work. I use this on the JMT, no problems. So go ahead and stick your wide pads in here. Okay, so here we are in the tent. I'm on my sleeping pad. For perspective, I am 5'10". I still have, quite a bit of headroom here before my head would be hitting the tent wall. At the foot end, I also have quite a bit of room. So even on this thick, I think it's about a 3.5-inch thick sleeping pad, as a 5'10" guy, I still have a little space in here. And with the wide angle, you can see just how roomy it actually feels in here. So considering the weight of this tent and the footprint of the bathtub floor, this feels pretty damn roomy. Okay, let's reluctantly get out of this tent now and talk about the pros and the cons. Okay, let's start with the pros. Obviously, it doesn't weigh much. 24 ounces for me with everything included. That, again, is the tent, stakes, the footprint, all the stuff sacks, 24 ounces, the tent body again, 17.7. So this is a very lightweight tent, 1.5 pounds, sub 2 pounds. You can't go wrong with that. Then we have the packed size. You saw it at the beginning of this video. It is nothing. And because it is sil poly, it's actually smaller than a lot of comparable Dyneema tents. So something else to consider there. I also love how easy it is to set up. The first maybe 1 or 2 times you set it up, you might have to, finagle it a little bit more. But once you get it down, I mean, it sets up in a breeze. It tears down in a breeze. It's real easy to put away if you even use a stuff sack. So lots of good things there in regard to setting up and tearing down the tent. Another pro is how roomy it feels inside. This is definitely something I've noticed. Before I got this Gossamer Gear tent, I was using a Nemo Hornet 2-person, and even though the floor of that was a little bit wider, this Gossamer Gear, the 1, actually feels bigger inside because the poles angle slightly outward, and I don't know, it just makes for a roomy feeling interior, and that's something I really enjoy about the tent. But it's not all good. Of course, one of the things you have to look out for any single wall shelter, this one I've definitely noticed it on, but I mean the same could be applied to any single wall shelter, and that is condensation. Now in dry climates, it's often not an issue. When I'm hiking around here in Arizona, I haven't really had to deal with much condensation, but a couple nights on the JMT when it was getting down to freezing or we were camping by water, and there's definitely some obvious buildup. Then on those rainy nights or where it's humid outside, there's a lot of condensation inside. So I do recommend bringing a pack towel if you're going to use this tent, so you can wipe it down in the middle of the night and when you get up in the morning, just to make sure it's not dripping onto you and making you cold. So this next one's kind of a pro and a con. I've noticed it's very sturdy in the wind. I've had no structural problems with this in high winds, and I've actually been in a couple pretty windy spots with this. But because of the low ventilation on the head and the foot, and just because of the gap here and then the mesh wall right next to you, a lot of dust can get inside if you're in a dusty area. So if it's windy and dusty, you may end up covered in dust. I have for sure. I mean, if you're somewhere where it's, a little more moist and the ground's not dusty, then that's going to be a non-issue, but something to consider if you're in a drier environment. Another con is, again, due to the fact that it is a non-freestanding tent. So if you're going to be camping on rocky ground, it might be tough to pitch it because you need to have those stakes tensioned out pretty well. You can use rocks in a pinch, but that's not something I would rely on. Another con is the fact that most of the tent is made of 10 denier sil poly. So it's waterproof up to, I think it was 1800 millimeters, which compared to a lot of other tents really is not that much. So fortunately I've not been in a torrential downpour with this, but I think if I was, I'd be worrying about the fabric soaking through and that water coming in onto me. But fortunately, most of my hiking is in Arizona or in the West where the climate's a little bit drier, and any rain is usually short-lived, so that has not been an issue for me yet. Another con, and this one's a little more personal, it came with a pretty weak zipper in my opinion. Maybe it's not a big deal for a lot of people, but I think I might have been in it for about 30 nights before it finally broke on me. But again, one of the pros is Gossamer Gear has really good customer service, and they had that third party replace it with a sturdier, thicker zipper, no problem, and it hardly added any weight to it. So that about does it for my pros and cons. Just let me give my overall thoughts on this tent. Again, the reason I'm reviewing it is because this is one of my favorite pieces of gear. It got me through the JMT. I think I had about 18 nights in it on there, and I've used it, I don't know, 20 nights since then. So this thing has been holding up solid. So is the one for you? Well, obviously that's up for you to decide. But in my opinion, just for an average weekend backpacker who's getting out every now and then, could this be your one single go-to tent? I'm not sure. Personally, if I could only have one single tent in my entire tent rotation, I guess that'd just be one tent, that would probably be a semi-freestanding or a freestanding tent, just because you can pitch them everywhere. They're going to be a little more durable, hold up really good in weather. But if your goal is to crush miles, go long distances, or you just want the lightest pack possible, this is a great tent. Or if you're like me and you can have multiple tents, then yeah, because I honestly use this one more than my Nemo Hornet. But when I'm going somewhere that I know it's going to be hard to pitch this thing, I will still take the Nemo. So again, if you can only have a single tent in your rotation, I don't know if this would be the one. If you can have multiple tents, absolutely. You're going to love this thing. And again, if you're trying to crush miles, if you're going on a through hike, I mean, this thing's going to be pretty hard to beat. So there you have it. That is the Gossamer Gear, the one. You have the specs, you saw how to set it up, you had a little tour of the tent. I gave you my thoughts on it. Is it the one for you? Well, that's up for you to decide. But that's going to do it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, if you found it helpful, if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I'm going to be sharing all of my adventures, probably doing some more reviews here shortly. But until next time, I'll see you out on the trail. Cheers.